The stars were always quiet, silent in their distant corners of the galaxy, but they had seen much. Among the countless planets and species, there was one thing that had the attention of every sentient being across the cosmos: the reputation of the Deathworld Cadets. They were humans, but not like the other species that roamed the universe. They were known for surviving things that no other creature, no matter how powerful or intelligent, could. The reputation of these cadets spread like wildfire, a whisper in the corridors of space stations, a tale passed from one alien civilization to another. The Deathworld Cadets were part of a unique military program. They were sent to the deadliest, most inhospitable planets in the galaxy. Planets so dangerous that even the strongest of alien species had failed to conquer them. On these worlds, life was an endless battle. The air would burn your lungs, the ground could shift beneath your feet, and the creatures. They were unlike anything most species had ever seen. Yet, the humans, time and time again, survived, even thrived, and they did so with an intensity and determination that left the other species questioning what kind of beings they truly were. Now, the rumors about the humans had taken a new turn. A new planet, Valara, had been discovered, a place so wild, so chaotic, that even the toughest of alien warriors had refused to step foot on it. It was said that no one could survive on Valara. Its atmosphere was toxic, the ground was constantly shifting, and the creatures were ruthless. Yet, when the Deathworld Cadets were sent there, something strange began to happen. The humans didn't just survive, they adapted. They moved quickly, learned faster than any other species could, and overcame challenges that would have crushed others. It was on this very planet, Valara, that the aliens watching from their distant ships felt the first spark of doubt. These humans, they realized, weren't just surviving. They were thriving in ways that seemed almost impossible. How were they doing it? What made them different? How could they conquer what others could not? The alien species were watching, each in their own way, wondering the same thing. Some came from species that were massive, with scales so tough they could withstand explosions. Others had minds so sharp that they could predict their enemies' moves before they even made them. There were species that had developed the ability to control the elements, bending the very forces of nature to their will. And yet, despite all their advanced abilities, they all feared Valara. But when they saw the humans, with nothing but their wits, their weapons, and their resilience, moving through the deadly terrain like it was just another day, they began to fear them. Fear the humans in a way they had never feared anything before. As the cadets prepared for their mission on Valara, the tension grew. The aliens were waiting, hoping to see these humans fall, to see them fail in the same way all others had. They set up their surveillance on Valara, ready to witness their downfall. But what they saw next left them speechless. The humans didn't hesitate. They didn't panic. They moved with purpose, as though the dangers around them didn't exist. They worked together, using their limited resources in ways that no alien could have imagined. When they encountered the first deadly creature on the planet, a beast with claws as long as a human arm and eyes that glowed with hunger, the cadets didn't run. They didn't even flinch. Instead, they studied the creature, learning its movements, anticipating its attacks, and in a matter of minutes, they outsmarted it, turning its own aggression against it. The aliens watching from their ships were stunned. These humans weren't afraid. They didn't back down. They didn't panic. They were calm. They were fearless. And in that moment, the aliens realized something. These humans were different. They weren't just survivors. They were conquerors, in ways no one had ever imagined. As the cadets ventured further into the wild terrain of Valara, the creatures grew more dangerous, the environment more deadly. But with every challenge, the humans didn't just survive, they adapted. The aliens began to wonder what was behind this extraordinary ability. What made these humans capable of doing the impossible? The tension reached its peak when the cadets discovered a massive underground cavern, a place that no other species had dared to explore. It was home to creatures so monstrous, so terrifying, that the very sight of them had driven entire armies to retreat. But the cadets didn't hesitate. They ventured deeper into the darkness, their eyes sharp, their movements calculated. The creatures that had once been the apex predators of the planet now found themselves outwitted, outsmarted, and defeated. From their ships, the aliens couldn't understand it. How were the humans doing this? How were they surviving against all odds, against everything Valara threw at them? It wasn't just their strength. It wasn't just their technology. It was something else, something the aliens couldn't quite put their finger on. It was as though the humans had an instinct, a drive, a will to survive that no other species possessed. And as the days passed, and the cadets continued to conquer one challenge after another, the aliens began to realize the truth. These humans weren't just surviving, they were thriving. And they were capable of things no other species could even begin to understand. The fear that had once gripped the aliens began to turn into something else, something darker. What were these humans capable of? What had they discovered on Valara that was so powerful? And most importantly, what would happen when they reached the heart of the planet? The reputation of the Deathworld cadets had only just begun to grow, and the universe was starting to learn that these humans, against all odds, were capable of things no one else could even imagine. The Deathworld cadets had only just begun their mission on Valara, but the first challenge they faced was enough to leave even the most experienced observers in shock. The planet's surface was nothing like any world they had seen before. A toxic atmosphere swirled above, thick with dangerous gases that could suffocate an unprepared being in minutes. The ground trembled constantly, as if the planet itself was alive, shifting and rearranging, hiding deadly traps beneath the surface. But what truly made Valara terrifying were its creatures. They were massive, aggressive, and cunning, each more dangerous than the last. No other species had even attempted to colonize Valara, and those who had tried before never returned. From their observation posts in the sky, the alien species watched with keen interest. Their eyes were fixed on the humans who had just landed, ready to observe their inevitable failure. The aliens knew Valara's secrets. They understood what the planet was capable of, and they expected the humans to meet their end in the same way countless others had. The aliens were confident that this was the final test. The humans would die on Valara, and their reputation would be proven false. But to their shock, the humans didn't panic. They didn't even seem afraid. The moment the cadets stepped onto the planet's surface, they immediately started working as a unit. They moved with precision, each member taking on a role. One cadet studied the sky, using a scanner to analyze the atmosphere, while another worked on setting up their equipment to measure the stability of the ground beneath them. The rest of the group fanned out to create a defensive perimeter. Nothing was left to chance. The first creature they encountered was a massive predator, easily 10 times the size of the largest human. It had claws like daggers and sharp teeth that could tear through steel. Its roar echoed across the valley, shaking the very ground they stood on. The alien observers, seeing the approaching creature, expected the humans to flee, to scramble in panic as others had done. But the cadets did not retreat. Instead, they analyzed the beast's movements. They'd watched it closely, noting its pattern of attack. The creature roared again and charged. As the beast lunged toward them, one cadet quickly tossed a small device at its feet. The device released a blinding flash of light that temporarily blinded the creature, causing it to stagger back in confusion. In that instant, the cadets moved in, working as a team. One cadet distracted the creature, drawing it toward him, while another set a trap. Using the terrain to their advantage, they led the creature into a narrow ravine where its size worked against it. The trap was set, and with a swift move, the cadets overpowered the beast. It was a clean kill, done without unnecessary violence, using only their understanding of the creature's behavior and the environment. The alien observers were left speechless. They had been watching the humans for only a few hours, and already they had accomplished what no other species had done. The cadets didn't just survive the encounter, they had outsmarted the creature. The aliens had expected them to fail, to be overwhelmed by the sheer violence of the planet. But they hadn't. They had adapted, just as their reputation suggested. As the cadets continued their journey, the challenges grew even more intense. The next day, they encountered an enormous storm that struck the planet with terrifying force. Winds howled, and the air was filled with lethal gases. Lightning cracked through the sky, striking the ground with deadly precision. Most species would have been forced to shelter and wait out the storm, but not the cadets. They immediately set to work, using their training to construct shelters from the materials they had on hand, reinforcing their position against the howling winds. The aliens, watching from above, thought it was only a matter of time before the storm would break the cadets, but the humans seemed prepared for anything. Their shelters were built with such skill and speed that even the harsh winds couldn't tear them apart. The cadets worked together, sharing resources and maintaining calm in the face of adversity. Their adaptability, their ability to overcome any challenge, was becoming clearer with every passing moment. It wasn't just about brute strength or advanced technology. The humans had something else, something that no other species seemed to possess. They had an innate ability to understand their surroundings, to read the land, the sky, and the creatures in ways that the aliens couldn't. The cadets weren't just surviving, they were learning, adapting, and mastering Valara's deadly environment. As the storm finally passed and the skies cleared, the aliens realized something that made their blood run cold. These humans weren't just fighting to survive. They were changing the very nature of the planet. With each step they took, they were transforming Valara from a world of impossible dangers into a challenge they could overcome. And with each victory, the reputation of the Deathworld cadets grew stronger. The aliens began to ask themselves, if these humans could conquer Valara, what else were they capable of? What other worlds could they tame? What would happen when they set their sights on the universe itself? The tension among the alien species grew as they continued to watch. What they had once seen as a simple mission had now become a mystery they couldn't understand. How were the humans doing it? What was behind their success? Could it be that humanity was more than just survivors? Could they be the ultimate conquerors of the galaxy? The aliens knew that the answers to these questions could change everything. And they had no idea just how right they were. The deeper the Deathworld cadets ventured into Valara, the more they uncovered about the planet's true nature. And with each discovery, the mysteries surrounding their survival grew even more intense. They had already proven their worth by surviving the deadly creatures and the unpredictable terrain, but now they faced something far more dangerous. A hidden history that suggested there was far more to Valara than they had ever expected. One day, while exploring a remote region of the planet, one of the cadets stumbled upon a set of ancient ruins hidden deep within a jungle. These ruins, covered in thick vines and overgrown plants, were unlike anything they had seen before. The architecture was strange, unlike the structures of any known alien civilization. The walls were covered in symbols, some familiar, others completely foreign. They appeared to tell a story of a species that had once lived on Valara, but had disappeared without a trace. Curious, the cadets began to study the symbols. It wasn't long before they realized that the ruins held important clues about the planet's past. The symbols seemed to describe a time when Valara had been home to an advanced civilization, one that had mastered the deadly environment. But as they pieced the puzzle together, a troubling pattern began to emerge. The civilization had flourished, just as humans were doing now, but something had caused it to collapse. A catastrophic event, unlike anything the cadets had encountered before, had wiped them out. As the cadets continued to dig deeper into the ruins, they uncovered more pieces of the puzzle. They found a hidden chamber, deep underground, where the remains of the ancient species lay. The chamber was filled with strange, crystalline objects, as if the species had used them in some sort of ritual or technological process. It was clear that the civilization had been incredibly advanced, far beyond anything the humans had achieved so far. But what had happened to them? It didn't take long for the cadets to realize that the collapse of the ancient civilization was not a random event. The clues pointed to something much darker, a secret buried within the planet's core. The civilization had discovered something powerful beneath the surface of Valara, something so dangerous that it had ultimately destroyed them. The creatures that roamed the surface, the shifting ground, the toxic atmosphere, everything on Valara seemed to be the result of this ancient power. The ecosystem was in a delicate balance, and if disturbed, it could destroy everything on the planet. And yet, the cadets had already begun to disturb it. The realization hit hard. They had been focused on survival, adapting to the environment, and overcoming the planet's deadly creatures. But now they understood that their actions were not just about surviving. They were playing with forces that could have consequences far beyond their understanding. The more they uncovered about the ancient civilization, the more the cadets began to question their mission. Was it worth risking the entire planet's delicate balance, just to prove that humans could conquer Valara? If they continued down this path, would they become just another species that had tried and failed to master the planet, doomed to fall like those who had come before them? As they pondered these questions, the tension among the cadets grew. Some were ready to push forward, believing that humanity could overcome any obstacle, no matter the cost. Others were more cautious, concerned about the dangers they were awakening. But one thing was certain: Valara was not just a planet. They had stumbled upon a force that had already wiped out an entire civilization, and now they were at risk of becoming the next victims. The aliens watching from above had no idea what the cadets were uncovering. They had only seen the humans as survivors, capable of overcoming the planet's dangers. But now, as the humans began to dig into Valara's history, the aliens began to question their own assumptions. Could the humans truly master Valara, or were they unknowingly stepping into a trap that no one, not even the most advanced species, could escape? The ancient species that had once called Valara home had left behind a warning that the cadets were now facing head-on. The delicate balance of the planet was not something to be taken lightly. And yet, the cadets couldn't help but push forward, driven by the same force that had always defined humanity: an unyielding will to survive, to conquer, and to prove that they could adapt to anything. As they ventured deeper into the ruins, the cadets began to uncover the most terrifying secret of all. The ancient civilization had not simply fallen due to a natural disaster or an accident. No, they had been destroyed by something far more insidious, a force within the planet itself, a sentient intelligence that had once helped the species thrive, but had turned against them when they began to disrupt the balance. It was a force that had been dormant for centuries, waiting for someone, anyone, to awaken it. And now, that force had begun to stir again. The cadets had unknowingly become the catalyst for something far beyond their understanding. As they stood in the heart of the ruins, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The air grew thick with static, and the once silent creatures of the planet began to move, as if drawn to the disturbance. The ancient power was awakening, and the humans had triggered it. The aliens watching from afar finally understood the truth. The Deathworld cadets weren't just facing the deadly environment of Valara. They were now facing an ancient, intelligent force that had the power to destroy them all. The question no longer was whether the humans could survive, but whether they could survive the consequences of their actions. And in that moment, the aliens realized just how deeply they had underestimated humanity. The Deathworld cadets weren't just fighting for their lives. They were now fighting for the very future of Valara itself. The tension among the Deathworld cadets reached a boiling point as the ancient force they had unknowingly awoken began to make its presence felt. The ground trembled beneath their feet, the air thick with an unnatural hum, as though the planet itself was alive and reacting to their disturbance. The cadets had thought they were simply surviving, adapting to the harsh environment of Valara. But now, they realized they were facing something far more dangerous, a force that could erase everything in its path. It began with subtle signs, strange flickers in the sky, an eerie quiet where there had once been the usual roar of Valara's deadly creatures. Then, the ground started to shift more violently, and the once stable structures they had built to shield themselves were rattling as if the planet itself was rejecting their presence. The Cadets knew they had done something they couldn't undo, and now they had to face the consequences. As they moved deeper into the ruins, they found themselves standing at the heart of an ancient, hidden complex, the walls covered in more symbols, symbols that now seemed to glow faintly. It was here that the final, terrifying truth was revealed. The ancient civilization had not been wiped out by a natural disaster or a simple mistake. No, they had been destroyed by a sentient intelligence that had lived beneath the surface of Valara. It had once been their ally, guiding them, helping them to survive and thrive. But over time, as the civilization grew, so too did the intelligence's power. The balance was shattered when the people began to take more than they should, disturbing the natural equilibrium of the planet. The force that had once been a guardian had become a predator, and it had obliterated the civilization, leaving behind only ruins and a warning for anyone who dared to trespass again. The Cadets now understood the gravity of their situation. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting something that had the power to control the planet itself, a force that could destroy them all. But there was no turning back. They had already gone too far. Their mission was no longer about proving their strength. It was about stopping the planet's ancient predator before it could wipe them out and maybe even the rest of the universe. As the ground rumbled again, the Cadets quickly made their way to the heart of the complex. They had to find a way to stop the force before it was too late. The alien species that had been watching from above were now filled with a mixture of fear and awe. The humans had not only survived the planet's deadly creatures, they had awakened something ancient and incredibly powerful. The stakes were higher than anyone had anticipated. The Cadets found themselves facing a massive, glowing core deep beneath the ruins. It pulsed with an otherworldly energy, its glow shifting with the rhythm of the planet. The force they had awakened was not a simple monster. It was a vast, intelligent entity, a living part of Valara itself. Its presence was everywhere. In the air, in the ground, in the creatures that roamed the surface. It had been dormant for centuries, but now that it was awake, it was furious. The Cadets realized they had to do more than just survive. They had to fight back against this entity, not with weapons, but with understanding. They were dealing with a being that had once been an ally, and the only way to stop it was to restore the balance they had disrupted. The energy from the core, however, was unlike anything they had ever encountered. It was a sentient force, and it could manipulate everything around them, bending the environment to its will. As the Cadets prepared to face this new enemy, they could feel the immense pressure mounting. Time was running out. The ancient intelligence was growing stronger, feeding off their every move. The creatures on the planet, once just mindless predators, were now moving in coordinated patterns, almost as if they were under the entity's command. The Cadets understood that if they didn't act quickly, they would be overwhelmed, not just by the creatures, but by the planet itself. The aliens watching from above, unable to comprehend the depth of the situation, realized they had underestimated the humans even more than they had thought. The Deathworld Cadets weren't just survivors of deadly environments. They were now standing at the edge of an existential crisis. And yet, despite the overwhelming odds, the Cadets showed no fear. They had faced death before, but this was different. This was a fight against something far older and more powerful than anything they had ever encountered. As they approached the glowing core, the Cadets worked together, each using their skills and knowledge to try and understand the energy field around them. The atmosphere grew more oppressive, as if the planet itself was resisting their presence. But the Cadets were determined. They didn't know if they could defeat this ancient intelligence, but they knew they had to try. The fate of the entire planet, and perhaps more, rested on their shoulders. The energy from the core surged, and the Cadets felt their bodies tremble under its power. They could hear the hum of the force growing louder, and the ground beneath them began to crack. The ancient intelligence was preparing to strike, to erase them from existence, just as it had done to the civilization that had come before. But the cadets, with their unique combination of training, teamwork, and resilience, had one final plan. They would attempt to restore the balance that had been lost. If they could re-establish the equilibrium between the planet's life force and the intelligence beneath, they might have a chance to survive. But that plan wasn't guaranteed. The cadets knew they had only one shot, and they would have to work quickly. The force was already unleashing its fury, the planet itself reacting violently. The cadets braced for the worst, knowing that if they failed, not only would they die, but they might also unleash the entity's wrath upon the galaxy. The battle for Valara had now become a battle for survival on a much larger scale. And as the cadets prepared to make their final move, the watching aliens could only wonder, would the Deathworld cadets prove to be humanity's greatest triumph, or would they become another forgotten footnote in the history of Valara? The ground shook violently as the ancient intelligence beneath Valara's surface stirred, a force of unimaginable power awakening with the fury of a planet long dormant. The Deathworld cadets stood at the heart of the glowing core, surrounded by the pulse of energy that had once given life to the planet's mysterious ecosystem. The air around them crackled with static, and the sky above them darkened, swirling with clouds that seemed to move as though alive. Valara, in all its deadly glory, was now a battleground between humanity and an ancient intelligence with the power to reshape the very fabric of the planet. The cadets knew that their time was running out. The energy emanating from the core had become almost unbearable, pressing against their bodies like a heavy weight. The earth beneath them was literally buckling, and the once stable ruins around them had begun to collapse. The creatures that roamed Valara, once wild and uncontrollable, now moved with purpose, as if commanded by a single malevolent will. The planet itself was rising against them. But the cadets refused to yield. They had been trained to face the impossible, to overcome any challenge thrown their way. Their mission was no longer just survival. It had become a race against time to stop a force they had only just begun to understand. The ancient intelligence, once a guardian of Valara, had become something much darker, an entity of pure power, intent on eradicating those who threatened its dominion. With the core glowing brighter by the second, the cadets gathered their remaining strength. They knew they had to act quickly, and they had one final plan. The ancient symbols they had discovered in the ruins hinted at a method to restore the balance they had disrupted. The key to stopping the entity wasn't to fight it with brute force, but to recalibrate the delicate harmony that had once existed between Valara and its ancient guardian. The cadets had to learn how to reawaken the alliance that had existed between the two, a bond that had been severed long ago. In the center of the crumbling ruins, the cadets positioned themselves around the core, each taking their place as they had been trained. They used the technology they had brought with them, tools for scanning, analyzing, and manipulating energy fields. But it wasn't enough. The key lay in something more, something they had overlooked. The energy of the planet was tied to the life force of its creatures, its land, and its very atmosphere. The cadets understood now that the balance they had disrupted was not just physical, but spiritual, rooted in the deepest forces of nature. The cadets reached out to each other, their hands touching the pulsating core. They knew they had to act in unison. They had to synchronize their efforts to restore the connection. Their breath steady, their focus unwavering, they began to channel their own energy, focusing their will, their minds, and their hearts into the core. The ground trembled, but this time, it wasn't in opposition to them. It was as if the planet itself had felt their determination, felt their will to restore what had been lost. The ancient intelligence, sensing the shift, began to fight back, but the cadets held firm. The energy from the core surged through them, their bodies trembling with the raw power of Valara as they connected with the force beneath. It was then that they realized the true nature of the intelligence. It wasn't a malevolent force at all. It was a part of Valara, a living, breathing entity that had been created to guide and protect the planet. But over time, it had grown lonely, its connection to the planet weakening, until it became desperate to ensure its own survival by removing any threat. The species that had once thrived on Valara had unwittingly pushed it to this state, disturbing the balance it had long maintained. The Cadets, now deeply connected to the Force, understood that they weren't enemies of Valara. They were the planet's hope, its last chance for renewal. Their mission had never been to conquer, but to restore, to remind Valara of the harmony it had once known. The energy from the core continued to grow, but now, instead of feeling oppressive, it felt welcoming, as if the planet itself was embracing them. The sky above them cleared, and the trembling of the ground began to subside. The once deadly creatures of Valara, whose movements had once been dictated by the ancient intelligence, now paused, as if waiting to see what would happen next. The planet was still, its dangerous forces now calmed, as if acknowledging the Cadets' success. The ancient intelligence, its presence now softened, seemed to accept the Cadets as its new allies. The aliens watching from above could hardly believe their eyes. What they had witnessed was beyond anything they had expected. The humans had not only survived Valara's deadly environment, they had restored the balance between the planet and its ancient force. They had proven something the aliens had never imagined: humanity's ability to adapt, to understand, and to work with the natural world, even when faced with the most unimaginable of challenges. The Cadets stood together, breathing deeply, their bodies still charged with the energy of Valara. They had faced impossible odds, and yet, against all expectations, they had succeeded. Valara was no longer a Deathworld. It was a world of possibility, a world where humanity could thrive, not as conquerors, but as partners with the planet's ancient intelligence. As the Cadets made their way back to their ships, they couldn't help but reflect on what they had accomplished. They had been sent to Valara as a test, but what they had found was far greater than a simple victory. They had discovered the true meaning of survival, not through brute strength, but through understanding, cooperation, and respect for the forces that governed the universe. The aliens, still watching from above, knew one thing for certain: the Deathworld Cadets were not just survivors. They were the future, and no force in the universe could stand against them.